Watch closely. 40,000 beads, each one bouncing at random. Left, right, no way to predict where any single bead will land. And yet, every single time, they pile up into this one shape, the same graceful curve. Not similar, the same. So here is the question that should bother you. How does pure, unrepeatable randomness agree again and again to build exactly this? Let's take it apart. This machine is called a Galton board, the bean machine. And to understand it, we shrink the problem all the way down. Forget 40,000 beads. Follow just one. Here is our bead at the very first peg. It bounces left or right. In the ideal board, each side is equally likely, probability 1/2, and the bounce has no memory of anything that came before. Mathematicians call one such event a Bernoulli trial. Row after row, the same choice repeats. Left, right, right. 12 rows in all, 12 independent flips of a fair coin. Now the only thing that matters, count the rights. This bead went right 7 times, so its bin number is 7, counting from 0 at the far left edge. Where a bead lands depends on this single count and on nothing else. Write x, I equals 1 when flip number I goes right, and 0 when it goes left. Then the bin number is simply x1 plus x2 all the way up to x12. One bead's landing spot is a sum of 12 independent Bernoulli trials. That single sentence is the whole machine. And notice something. 2 completely different journeys with the same number of rights end in the very same bin. The order of the flips is forgotten. Only the count survives. So the real question is not where one bead goes. The question is how many paths lead to each bin. Now put the one bead picture to work. Label every peg with one number. How many distinct paths reach it from the top? The apex gets a 1. Every other peg is fed by its 2 upper neighbors, so its number is the sum of theirs. 1 and 1 make 2. 1 and 2 make 3. Row by row, a famous object assembles itself, Pascal's triangle. Let's count for real on a tiny board, just 4 rows tall, and fix one target, the bin that needs exactly 2 rights. 6 distinct paths arrive there, and 6 is precisely 4, choose 2, the binomial coefficient. Scale that up. Here is the full 12-row board, 1 bar per bin, each bar as tall as its path count. The rightmost bin is reachable by exactly 1 path, 12 rights in a row. But the middle bin is reached by 924 different paths. Now probability enters through one honest fact. Every specific path, every exact sequence of 12 fair flips, has the same probability. 1/2 multiplied by itself 12 times. 1 in 4096. So the chance of landing in bin K is the number of paths to bin K divided by 4096. These path counts are the binomial coefficients, and this shape is the binomial distribution. The bell-like silhouette was never mysterious. It is pure counting. Middle bins win because vastly more paths lead there, but now squint at the outline of these bars. Where does this exact curve come from, and why is it the same curve for every board at every size? 2 numbers summarize any board of n rows. The average bin sits at n over 2, perfect balance, and the spread, the standard deviation, is the square root of n divided by 2. That square root does quiet, important work. Double the rows, and the pile widens by only a factor of 1.41, the square root of 2. Relative to the whole board, the pile keeps getting narrower. Now the move that unlocks everything. Stop measuring bins by absolute position. Measure each bin in standard deviations away from the mean. Here is a 4-row board on that axis. 16 rows, 64, 256. On this axis, the bars converge to one fixed silhouette. In 1733, Abraham de Moivre found its equation, decades before Gauss was even born. De Moivre stated it in a short Latin pamphlet, folded it into the 1738 edition of his book, The Doctrine of Chances, and Laplace generalized it in 1812. Here is the engine of their proof. Stirling's approximation rewrites each factorial as powers and a square root. A binomial coefficient contains 3 factorials. Substitute all 3, expand the logarithm near the center, and the towers of factorials collapse. What survives is the bell curve formula. In standardized form, a to the minus x squared over 2 divided by the square root of 2 pi. Nobody drew this curve by hand. It emerges, forced by the counting itself. This is the de Moivre-Laplace theorem. As the number of rows grows without bound, the standardized binomial bars hug this one curve ever more tightly. Near the center, the ratio of bar height to curve approaches exactly 1. Here is the twist. None of this was ever really about beads, or even about coins. Replace each coin flip with a fair die roll, and add 12 of them. Standardize and look, the same silhouette. Now replace the die with something lopsided, a skewed distribution, and add 40 independent copies. Standardize again, same silhouette. The ingredients changed completely. The limit did not. That is the central limit theorem. Take independent, identically distributed random variables, each with mean mu and a finite variance sigma squared, recenter their sum by nmu, rescale by sigma root n, and the result converges in distribution to the standard normal. Our board is the special case where every ingredient is a fair coin flip, exactly the theorem of de Moivre and Laplace. The fine print matters, independence matters, and finite variance is not decoration. Feed the theorem a heavy-tailed ingredient with infinite variance, like the Cauchy distribution, and the bell never comes. The average of n Cauchy samples has the very same Cauchy distribution no matter how large n grows, and the convergence comes with receipts. The Bernoulli theorem bounds the worst-case gap between the true distribution and the normal, a constant no larger than 0.4690 times a third moment ratio, divided by the square root of n. For our fair coin flips, that gap provably shrinks at exactly that root n rate. Time for some honesty. Watch a real bead, and really watch it. It bounces backward, it skips a row, it clips 2 pegs at once and ricochets off a neighbor. Its next move depends on its momentum and on the exact angle of impact. This is not a coin flip. Successive bounces are not independent, and the chance of going right is not exactly 1/2. A real Galton board is a deterministic, chaotic machine. So, does the mathematics collapse? Let's stress test the worst offender, memory. 2 walks, 12 steps each, on the same scale. On the left, the ideal walk, every step independent. On the right, a walk with momentum. Each step repeats the previous one, with probability 0.75. Look at the result. The momentum pile is still bell-shaped, but it is wider. With this much memory, over 12 rows, the spread is about 1.6 times what the independent model predicts. Correlation did not destroy the bell. It changed the variance. And this is not hypothetical. In 2007, Kevin Judd analyzed the dynamics of a real quincunx and concluded that it behaves as a low-dimensional deterministic dynamical system. Chaos, not coin flips. So why does a real board still deliver the curve? 2 honest reasons. First, chaos manufactures effective randomness. Microscopic differences at each impact get amplified until deterministic paths become statistically indistinguishable from random ones. Second, and deeper, the theorem never demanded coins. A final position built from many small, weakly dependent nudges of finite variance is enough, and versions of the Central Limit Theorem cover sums with exactly this kind of short-range dependence. So the coin flip model of a real Galton board is, strictly speaking, wrong. And it is still the right model to think with. Wrong in the details, correct in the structure. That is what a good mathematical model is. The machine has a name and a history. Francis Galton designed it in 1873 and demonstrated it at the Royal Institution the following year. He called it the quincunx, and he described it fully in his 1889 book, Natural Inheritance. Honesty asks for one more line. Galton also coined the word eugenics, and his statistics were entangled with a hereditarian ideology that is now rightly rejected. Beautiful mathematics does not choose its uses, people do. Even the curve's name is a small lesson in history. De Moivre found it in 1733. Laplace generalized it. Gauss used it for the errors of astronomy, and it is Gauss's name that stuck. Statisticians call this Stigler's law of eponymy. No scientific discovery is named after its original discoverer, but it was Galton, watching beads rattle into order, who found the words, "I know of scarcely anything so apt to impress the imagination as the wonderful form of cosmic order expressed by the law of frequency of error. It reigns with serenity and in complete self-effacement amidst the wildest confusion. The huger the mob, and the greater the apparent anarchy, the more perfect is its sway." Natural Inheritance, 1889. Randomness at scale is not the absence of order. It is where this order comes from. Everything we leaned on today is on screen, from de Moivre's pamphlet to Judd's chaos analysis. Thanks for watching.